I've reacted to beginners learning the piano on this channel quite a few times now, and this one, out of all of them, is the most unbelievable. And that's because the video that I'm going to react to today is by someone called Brandon Hawksley, and he claims to be a beginner that has done 700 hours of practice in 1 year. Now, for those of you that are mathematically challenged, that means you will have had to have practiced 2 hours every day for the entire year. And that is actually very possible. There are no doubt times in my career where I have practiced 2 hours every day for an entire year. However, for a beginner, that is very unlikely. So let's get into it.
It's not really much different, I don't think.
Okay, for day one, unless he's had piano lessons before, using the correct fingers, playing a C major scale, that seems kind of unlikely in itself, which leads me to believe he has played some piano before.
You like that, didn't you?
I think it's really bitter.
Recording?
Mm-hmm.
This is more believable. I mean, day 4, he's reading the music, which is very good. He's got a good hand position, and his hand is staying in one position on the piano, which is what you should do when you first start learning. Interestingly, he doesn't have a pedal, even though this is an electric piano, so you would have thought it would have come with one. But so far, so good.
Sounds really good.
This is why it's so hard to believe that someone would practice 2 hours a day this early on, because if you're playing this kind of piece and you're doing it for 2 hours constantly, there's a point where you're going to have diminishing returns. There isn't a lot to get your teeth into with this kind of piece. You're just drilling it into your hands until your hands are physically able to play it. And you're trying to get used to reading music because it's like a completely different language when you've never read it before. Yeah, this is quite the jump for 2 weeks, so this is, what, 10 days after that last video where he was reading music, and also at this point he's obviously memorised it because he's looking at his hands rather than the page, which I would definitely not recommend. But if he has been really committed to it, then it's perfectly possible for 2 weeks. All of these beginner videos are always the same pieces. As I said in the last video that I did watching someone's piano progress over 1 year, I mean, I would say that Fur Elise is probably a grade 3 or 4 standard, so if you are starting out, it's probably not the best piece to play. So if you're trying to learn a piece like this really early on, you're missing quite a lot of information by the time you go to play it. You should be able to train this into your hand physically, but beyond that, you're still not really going to have an idea about what you're playing and why you're playing it, why it uses the notes it does, what chords it uses, things like that. I think there are a lot better pieces that you can learn for 3 weeks that sound just as good, that are more catered to that level. So it seems to me he's probably read the music and studied it and then just memorised it by accident. But even if you do memorise a piece, I would always advise carrying on looking at the music so you know where you are and you're not missing any details. It's also going to help your playing a lot further down the line when you're trying to read hard pieces of music and you've already got it conditioned into yourself to always look at the page. Because the music in front of you is always going to be the thing that tells you all of the information, so why not look at it? Yeah, a couple of things here that people normally find quite difficult. One is the pedaling, which he obviously has now because I can hear the pedal. But also playing octaves in one hand and moving them around is something that people always find difficult as well. I am assuming he's self-taught, but he is actually doing a pretty good job. Although this is definitely not 2 hours a day of practice, and if it is, then it's very inefficient. Yeah, he's got a lot more sensitivity in his playing now. The pedalling he's using is a little bit mushy. Normally, the rule of thumb for when you're supposed to change the sustain pedal is whenever the chords change. So, for example, this is a chord, then it changes to this, and then to this. And that way the chords don't sound like they're all blending into one like this. Where you've got kind of a mush in the background. I like the fact he's got his toothbrush on charge in the background. This is still very possible for someone practicing half an hour a day in the same amount of time, but he is still doing a good job, and his technique when playing doesn't seem too bad for someone that's probably self-taught. I hate this piece with a passion. It's just one of those pieces that I've been asked to teach 500 times. He seems to have got rid of music altogether at this point. As I said earlier, when he was playing and reading the music, that is the best thing you can hold on to when you're learning the piano. The minute you start looking at your hands instead of what's on the page and memorizing what you're playing, that's when your ability to read sheet music falls behind your ability to play the piano, and therefore it's really hard to get good at reading music after that, because you're not going to want to start playing easier pieces just so you can practice reading.
There's actually nothing on this paper.
Which is what most people have to do to get good at sight reading, because their ability to play the piano exceeds their ability to read the music. You're much better off just trying to keep your eyes on the page as much as possible as you're learning, because then not only will you get really good at sight reading, but you're also not going to miss a lot of the detail that might be written into pieces. He plays really evenly as well, which is something that I know a lot of people find quite hard, but that just comes from practicing using the right fingers when you're playing these kind of pieces. And also practicing things like scales or Hanon exercises, those kind of things. They get your fourth and fifth fingers, which tend to be the ones that are the most weak, to be more in control. So at this point he started to get lessons. Well, I don't know whether you noticed, but he's upgraded his piano. I mean, this is Debussy, and it's one of the best pieces to play. Just in the first page of this piece, there is so much detail. This is a piece that is by far past beginners. This is probably a grade 8 or above piece, and even on that first page, which sounds seemingly quite easy, it's got a lot of things like duplets and the use of rubato and things like that, which leads me to believe he's probably learnt this not by reading it. And I can tell that he's kind of not thinking about what the notes are actually doing as he's playing them, or what they mean, or how they relate to each other. My favourite part of this whole opening is this part. It's such a great piece. Yeah, so I imagine the music in front of him, the Mary Had a Lamb or whatever it was, is probably music that he's sight reading to try and get better at reading, whereas this is the kind of piece he's playing for fun. And letting your music reading ability fall behind that much just makes it sort of next to impossible to want to practice those easier pieces. Yeah, his technique's pretty good. I'd like to see more like sharpness in that left hand with his jumps. Something a little bit more definite and articulate. The difficulty with Chopin is he writes a lot of his pieces with ridiculous duplets in them. So there are these places where you've got to fit like an odd number of notes into the beat. Chopin did that quite a lot, particularly in his nocturnes. Yeah, so a couple of things. His pedalling is a little bit mushy still in places, so I'd probably spend a bit of time isolating that and practicing it. Also, the piece to me feels like it has one flavour.
I'm sorry, what are you talking about?
For the most part, the notes are pretty accurate, and actually the trills and the duplets and things like that make the rhythm more complicated is actually not too bad at, although I would probably isolate those as well. But I think if you can play this well, then the next step would be to add more character to it.
Oh, no!
And really think about how the melody's got to sing out and how the left hand doing kind of a waltz affects how he should play the music rather than just thinking, here is a series of notes that I've got to play. This was the first piece learnt using sheet music outside of my lesson. That's an interesting insight, but it was also fairly obvious. It's also interesting to me that he learnt this with sheet music, but he's still not reading the sheet music now, so he's gone straight back to trying to memorise it and then play it how he's played all of his other pieces. He really is doing himself a disservice by just not reading the music. And I have absolutely no doubt that now, several years later, his playing and music reading will be suffering because of it. At this point, I decided to only learn pieces I could read to make the transition over to reading music quicker. This is exactly what I was talking about. Now he's having to dumb down his playing, his technical ability, because he was trying to skip that step very early on. Imagine if at this point he was 2/3 as good technically as he is now, but he also could read any piece of music. He would make up that third that he would have lost by not playing really complex pieces early on, really quickly, but he would also be an all-rounded player who is really good at reading music. With arpeggios like that where you go, the temptation is always to just jump, so go 1, 2, 3, jump, 1, 2, 3, jump, 1, 2, 3. But then you end up with a really detached sound because it goes like this. So there's a gap in between. Even if you manage to play the notes rhythmically really evenly, you always end up bashing your thumb on the next note that you've jumped to. So you get where you can very easily hear the groups of 3. And this is why you practice arpeggios, where you try and put your thumb underneath to get the next note. Then when you come to play this kind of thing in pieces, it happens naturally, and it does happen a lot in pieces. His playing has become, over the time that he's been learning, it's become really sensitive. The one thing I would say with this piece is to try and get his left hand to stay quieter, because you don't want the melody to be overshadowed by the chords that are happening in the left hand. I think he stopped practicing scales very early on. His fingers didn't seem as relaxed as they should have been if he was practicing scales. I feel like he's probably right-handed because his left hand is a little bit weaker than his right hand. So if I was his teacher, I'd probably give him some exercises to get his fingers working a bit better in his left hand. I cannot tell you the amount of times that I have also chopped the piano. I mean, people spend years and years practicing piano and getting up to the point where they're like conservatoire level to play pieces like this. So, one, he's done a very good job to get to the point where he can even attempt playing a piece like this. But two, I would probably still step his way up to these kind of pieces and play pieces that are really achievable for his level. There are so many amazing pieces that are really playable that will really improve his technique and his ability to get to pieces like this. It's actually not a bad attempt. I know the text on screen is telling me that he wasn't happy with it, but it's really not a bad attempt. That is quite hilarious that he's gone for Mozart's C Major Sonata at this point. If you compare Mozart's C Major Sonata to the Fancy Impromptu, the Mozart C Major Sonata is one that I would probably suggest learning at this level rather than the Fancy Impromptu. And you can see how much more capable his hand is of playing those C major scales in the right hand. Yeah, it's a perfect example of a piece, as I was saying, that will step him up to the technique to be able to play stuff like Fancy Impromptu. Because this piece, although not easy, is very much in his wheelhouse. It's definitely the sort of piece that he will be able to nail and do very well. That is a very clean trill. He's obviously practiced that. Yeah, so I could see that he's still been very tentative about where his fingers go, and he's not 100% able to relax, but he has really put some time into this piece. And it shows he's playing it very well. Most people who have been learning for a year would not get anywhere near playing this piece this well. And if it's the sort of piece that's going to really motivate him to practice, then it's fair enough. But his music reading ability will have been sacrificed in the process. If you want to see my reaction to another beginner's 1 year of piano progress, then check out this video and I will see you there.